Hello and welcome to my channel In Search of Wonder. My name is Anne and this is my weekly wrap-up. Hello, so today is Saturday afternoon and this is my weekly wrap-up take 2. Yes, I had already recorded it this morning, but something happened and I lost a good half of it. I figured it was just easier to do the whole thing again. So this is a bit of an unusual weekly wrap up. Usually I have like clips from throughout the week of various things that we did and books that I read, but this week has not really been like that. First of all, I didn't finish a book until Thursday night, and then I finished another book Friday night and have not had time to record a clip about them, so I'm doing them right now. And those are the books that I read this week that I wanted to talk about. And didn't really have anything else of interest going on other than the fact that I completely lost my voice and was unable to sing, which is like what I do at work all day. And so had to totally improvise and do other things. So yeah, it's been a fun week. Mostly I have my voice back. You can probably hear it's a little bit, still a little bit has like a hoarseness to it, but we're getting there. We're getting there finally. It's been a ride. So the books that I read, that's what I'm here to talk about today. I read 2 books. The first book that I read for the Feb Regency reading challenge, whatever, Feb Regency, which was Christie Dostoevsky in Space's Her Prompt, to read a book set in the Regency era, which was easy peasy for me because that is my favorite Regency fiction to read. And I had seen this one on several booktube channels last fall, over through December, I guess. Several people had mentioned it and had talked about how much they really loved it. So I was like, oh, well, I'll try this one. Although the first book I read by this author, Megan Walker, Lake Shark Park, I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it either. And this one had similar flaws to it. And I am sorry to report that I didn't like this one. Unfortunately, I know a lot of people loved it, so I hate to say that, but I ended up giving it 2.5 stars, which, yeah. So I guess the main thing that I struggled with was the main character. Now, I don't mind flawed or unlikable characters as a whole. I think that they serve an important purpose in many different books. And more often than not, if a character is unlikable, they are supposed to be unlikable. Like there's a reason that works with the story. So I just dislike them, but that doesn't make me dislike the book. This one is a little bit different in that our main character, Rosalind Newbury, this is Miss Newbury's List, by the way. I don't think I ever said the title. Our main character, Rosalind Newbury, she is not supposed to be unlikable, I don't think. But I just strongly disliked how immature she came across and impulsive. And I'm just going to say it, it's a very negative word, silly. I felt like she was just silly. And her list, the list was that she had a bucket list of things she wanted to accomplish before she got married. And that seemed like an interesting storyline to me because, you know, back in this time of arranged marriages where young girls married for the advantage of their family in terms of wealth and nobility, etc., it was not uncommon for a young girl to be married to someone that she barely knew and or disliked, or, you know, why would she marry them? Certainly not because she loved them. And in this particular case, she is contracted to marry a duke, which is hugely advantageous for her family, but she barely knows him. I mean, I guess he's handsome enough and everything, but she doesn't really know him as a person. And so she wants to complete her bucket list before she gets married, you know, so that she can feel like at least, you know, she's enjoyed the things that she really wanted to do before she settles down to a life where she can't do anything she wants. So that premise in and of itself I thought was interesting, but it didn't work out quite the way that I thought it would. She made this list when she was 12. And the reason she made the list was because she watched her aunt get married, and she observed that her aunt was just so happy and joyful on the occasion of her wedding. And she was like, oh, I want that when I get married. And don't we all? It should be a joyful, happy day, right? But her aunt told her somewhere during the course of the wedding day that she had made a list of things that she wanted to do as a single person, and she had accomplished them all before she got married. And in this 12-year-old girl's mind, that was the reason she was so happy when she got married, because she had done all of the things she wanted to do as a single person, and now she was ready to embark on married life and all of the responsibility that it brings, so she was happy. Being totally oblivious of the fact that it was actually because she was marrying someone that she truly loved, and she was happy to be marrying them, and that's why she was so happy. You would think that as the girl grew older and as she faced the prospect of marrying someone that she did not love, that she would realize that that was what made her aunt so happy, but she's still stuck on this idea that if only she can accomplish all of the things that she wanted to before she gets married, then she will be happy to get married. And it just seemed like kind of immature of a premise. And her list was made when she was 12 years old, so some of the items on the list lacked maturity, like run away for a day. That's a very 12-year-old kind of concept. Yeah, so the way that the premise actually played out, I didn't love it. It didn't make as much impact of a plot as I feel like it could have if it had been dealt with a little more maturely, like maybe if she had a little more time to really do meaningful things on a list instead of like she had like 2 weeks. And maybe if she had more of an awareness of the fact that it wasn't getting married that was the problem. It was who she was marrying, to whom she was getting married, that was the problem in this case. The other thing that I didn't really love about this story was that there was, at the end, the way everything wrapped up required a complete 180 reversal on the part of everybody in the girl's family. So in the Newbury family, which, by the way, it's mentioned more than once that she has multiple brothers, but only one brother is ever named, and only one brother ever does anything in the story. Where are her other brothers? That's what I want to know. But anyways, there's a complete reversal on the part of everybody in her family as far as marrying the Duke. And they just act completely differently than they had all the way up until that point in the story. But there's not really a good reason given for why they suddenly change. And everything wraps up neatly at the end, and it doesn't, like, it's completely out of character for the people as they had been portrayed up until that point, which was my main issue with the book The Lakeshore Park that I read by her. The main character at a pivotal point in the story does something that's just completely out of character, and yet the plot kind of hangs on it, on what she does there in that point of the story. So I really, that's another problem I have when characters do something completely out of character for the way they have been portrayed up until that point in the story. And they just act in a way that doesn't make sense with who they are or their position in life or whatever. And then finally, the other issue that I took with this book was she was engaged to marry the Duke from the beginning of the story. And then she meets another guy throughout the course of the story and ends up falling in love with him. And I guess you could say that, initially she's thrown together with this guy, by circumstance, and she's not seeking him out. But there's definitely a point where they seek each other's company out, knowing full well that she is engaged to someone else, knowing full well that they have feelings for each other, and they're just proceeding forward anyway because they want to, regardless of this circumstance. And they never actually really do anything, but they definitely pursue each other, and she's not free to do that. No, not saying that, she marrying the Duke was the right thing for her to do, but certainly can't go around falling in love with somebody else. Like when you're engaged to someone, and it's never presented as, I mean, I guess it's sort of, you know, it creates friction in the storyline because, you know, she can't marry this other guy because she's engaged to the Duke. So I didn't love that aspect of the story. That sort of romantic tangle is not my cup of tea. When there's kind of like, not necessarily cheating going on, but kind of like, I didn't really love that aspect of the story. So all of that resulted in a 2.5-star rating for me. So the next book I read, you may have seen my try a chapter tag that I did on Friday, in which I chose to read The Vicar of Wakefield. And this I got on Project Gutenberg and downloaded to my Kindle. This was the second book for Feb Regency that I read, and this one fulfilled the prompt by Miss Richards Reads to read a new to me Regency author. So I had 3 that I couldn't decide between, so I did try a chapter tag and I settled on The Vicar of Wakefield. And this was an interesting story. It was pretty easy to read. I read it over the course of just a couple days and found it very readable. But it was almost like 2 different books. The first part of the story was, I felt like the narrator, who is the Vicar of Wakefield, he's narrating his own story, his family story. And I felt like there was an element of an unreliable narrator there, which kept playing through all the way about halfway through the book. And I felt like he was unreliable because he would describe himself or his family in one way, you know, putting them in the best light possible. And then in the very next paragraph or the very next sentence, they would do something or say something that completely negated what he had just previously said. And it was very interesting in the first half of a novel, there's like 2 layers of story going on. The one that he's telling and the one that you can see is actually happening. So it's very cleverly done in that way. And that persists through the first half of the story, maybe a little more, maybe like 65% of the way through. And then then the plot really starts developing. Like a lot has happened up to that point, but then the plot really kicks in. And then it shifts to more of a reliable narrative, and he's just being straightforward at that point. And honestly, even though a lot more is happening plot-wise in that section of the story, that part was not as interesting to me because 1, the narration was a lot more straightforward, but 2, it was a little more didactic, and it had like these passages of dialogue or monologue that were kind of diatribes on politics of the day, economy, you know, distribution of wealth, religion, etc. Even some, in one point there was some text from like the full text of essentially of like a sermon that he was preaching to people because, you know, he's a vicar, right? So it just came across to me like, I don't know, that the author was trying to drive home points about certain things, and it lost a little bit of the luster of a really well-written story, and just became more of like issue-driven, which is not my favorite kind of book to read. So it lost a little bit of its luster, like I said, in the second half of the story, and I did not enjoy that as much, even though that's where everything really happens in the story. And then also throughout the story, there is an element of like, I don't know, I guess they call it maybe sentimentality or sensibility or something like that. But I would also use the word melodramatic. There's definitely a melodramatic element to his narration. And I can give you an example from the end of the story where his one daughter, Sophia, has fallen in love with this one guy in the story, but he is trying to marry her off to someone else. And so he says, "Come, Miss Sophia, what say you to this match of my making? Will you have him?" My poor girl seemed almost sinking into her mother's arms at the hideous proposal. "Have him, sir," cried she faintly. "No, sir, never." "What?" cried he again. "Not have Mr. Jenkinson, your benefactor, a handsome young fellow, with 500 pounds and good expectations?" "I beg, sir," returned she, scarce able to speak, "that you'll desist, and not make me so very wretched." "Was ever such obstinacy known?" cried he again, To refuse a man to whom the family has such infinite obligations to, who has preserved your sister, and who has 500 pounds. What? Not have him? No, sir, never, replied she angrily. I'd sooner die first. If that be the case, then, cried he, if you will not have him, I think I must have you myself. And so saying, he caught her to his breast with ardour. My loveliest, my most sensible of girls, cried he, etc. So, there are a lot of scenes in the story like that where you can just imagine the ladies like, like that, you know, melodramatic, over the top. So, and then the other thing that happens at the end of the story that takes a little bit away from it, but I think that he's using a device that happens a lot, especially in plays, I think. I feel like I've seen it happen a lot in plays. Like in the final scene where everybody is, all of the characters that have been involved in the plot up until that point, they all come in the final scene and they all have some key piece to key piece to the puzzle that is the plot, and you know, like you get the whole picture and everything is resolved, and all the different ways that the various characters in the plot are revealed, how they all tie together, and everything is wrapped up in a nice big bow, and we're done with the story, etc. That definitely happens here. The closing scene is just like one person after another keeps coming in and revealing a new piece of information or a new piece to the puzzle of the plot, clearing up something about the plot, until every single person that has been a part of the story is now there present in this final scene, and everything gets wrapped up. So a little bit unrealistic in that way, but I think that he's using a common device that's not like unique to him. So can't fault him for that. In all, I gave it 4 stars because I really enjoyed the narration through most of it, with that kind of like double layer of story. And an aspect of that continues throughout it, but for the most part, the second half is not as much like that as the first half. And it was an easy readable story. I also, what I really appreciated as I was reading through this, I know that Jane Austen read this book. I think she mentions it in 1 or 2 of her novels. I believe Emma, I think maybe the Farmer Guy has read The Vicar of Wakefield. I'm not sure. But anyway, Jane Austen had clearly read this book. She was clearly inspired by this book, or she took ideas from this book, because there are certain plot points of Pride and Prejudice sprinkled throughout that story. Like the girl who comes to ruin, or in this case almost comes to ruin, by eloping with someone, and how she is rescued by someone else who ends up marrying her sister. And then the best there are some other pieces I think that Jane Austen pulled from there, but the funniest thing is that the actual vicar, the Vicar of Wakefield that is narrating the story, I was looking through reviews on Goodreads, and there was this one-star review, and I'll put the exact wording up here on the screen. I'll find it and put it up there because the way the person wrote it was so funny. But it was something along the lines of, "Hey babe, Mr. Collins dropped another single." And I just died laughing when I read that because I hadn't seen it before. But once I saw that, I could not unsee it. And the Vicar of Wakefield, whose name was Dr. Primrose, he was Mr. Collins. Like, if Mr. Collins never met Lady Catherine de Bourgh and never married anybody as sensible as Charlotte Lucas, and instead married someone more like, let's say, Mrs. Bennet from Pride and Prejudice, he would totally write this story. Oh my goodness. Totally. Completely like unaware of self and all of the things that Mr. Collins is. Like, it was so funny when I read that comment on Goodreads. So if you were now, I hope you are curious. I want to read that book if you haven't already, because, and I would be curious if you read it, if you agree with that assessment about Dr. Primrose being just another variation of Mr. Collins. And a couple of other things about the book. So there's definitely also in that book, there are a lot of allusions to the book of Job. Like, these things just keep happening to the vicar and his family. And the vicar himself, by his testimony, would be a solid, upright man. And he is, in the sense that he doesn't do anything like immoral or illegal. Like, he's very much against all of that. But he is also like at the beginning of the story, he's definitely a very vain and proud man, and doesn't realize it. And I'm not sure that he ever realizes fully about himself who he really is. But there's definitely a humbling that happens in the course of the story. There is character development in him. But there are Job elements to the story. And then at the end of the story, like when everything is restored to him and more, definitely reflective of the book of Job. So there seems to be some clear inspiration there from the book of Job, which was kind of interesting to see that. Anyway, so that was an interesting book. Overall, I very much enjoyed it, and I would give it 4 stars. That's 2 books for Feb Regency that I have read. And what else am I working on? Taylor and I from Tales and Treats with Tay are buddy reading The Letter Tree by Rachel Fordham, which is another one that was making the rounds on BookTube when it came out late last year. And I was very interested in reading it. And Taylor sent this to me. I won a giveaway that she was doing, and this was on my Amazon wish list. So she sent it to me and offered to buddy read it with me. And I was like, yes, that would be so fun. So we just started. I'm only a couple of chapters in, but I'm really enjoying it. And so far, I feel like I will have much better feelings at the end about this one than I did about Miss Newbury's List. Because so far I am really liking it, and I don't think I've read anything by Rachel Fordham, but I am enjoying her narrative style here. So I don't have a lot to say about this, but working on it, and we'll tell you more when I have finished it in my next week wrap up. I'm also reading Gentle and Lowly, and this is for the Chantel Read Your Shelf Challenge. I needed to read a book that was 250 pages or less, and this one qualifies. So it's a short book, and theoretically I could read it quickly, but I found when I read the first chapter that this is a book that needs to be lingered over and savored. So I am taking my time with this one. I am reading a chapter a night, kind of as a nightly devotion, and underlining so many things, so many beautiful thoughts, so many wonderful thoughts in this book. I will say more when I am finished with it, probably closer to the end of February. There's about 24 chapters, and I'm reading 1 chapter a night, and I'm like 6 or 7 chapters through. So it will take me most of February to read it. But I find it very interesting how much the author, Dane Ortlund, is drawing from the work of the Puritans in this book, because this book is all about the mercy and the gentleness and the humility of Christ and how he relates to us and how much he loves us and his mercy and kindness towards us. And those are not, we don't think of that when we think of the Puritans. We don't think of them as really having grasped the gentleness and the love of Christ. We think of them as being like legalistic and very much focused on work, like doing good works, possibly even to the end of achieving salvation, and like overbalancing works against the mercy and grace of God. But based on the writings that he's drawing from in this book, perhaps we have the wrong idea of the Puritans. Maybe we shouldn't be calling things puritanical when they are overly focused on conforming to outwardly to the law, so to speak. And I am curious now to read some more. I have read a book, I believe, by John Owens, who is quoted in here. I'm not the book that's quoted, but I have read a book by John Owens. And John Bunyan is also mentioned, and I have read Pilgrim's Progress by him. And then he mentioned some other Puritan authors that I have not read. But now I'm thinking that I would like to read some of their works, because they seem to really have a strong grasp of Scripture on this subject matter, and obviously others. So anyway, it's been very interesting. I'm really enjoying reading this, and I'm so thankful that people recommended this. In particular, Catherine from Read Journal Love had recommended this one, and I bought it on her recommendation, and I'm really enjoying it. I'm also still working on And the Dead Shall Rise. A little bit further through. I'm just, it's probably going to take me a while up through March to read this one. But one thing that has been, two things I want to mention about this book that I've been reading in the past week or two. One is that, oh my word, the racism in Atlanta, Georgia, in this day, which is where the crime happened, the racism in this day, like 1912, the newspaper, like it was blatant in the newspapers, the way they talked about Black people and Jews, just the way that they like referenced everybody like by their race, and just had stereotypical ideas of all of them, and referred to them in such derogatory terms. Yeah, that's just, wow. Very eye-opening, very shocking and appalling. And I can't believe that grown, civilized men were referring to one another in such ways. I mean, humans are humans in every age, and it happens. But, it's hard to read sometimes. And then the other thing that I found interesting, totally different note here, so much was going on in this case that happened in Atlanta, and it became such a big thing. And local Atlanta politics, Georgia politics, and even nationwide politics came into play. There were different factions involved. There were Black people involved in the story. There were Jews involved in the story. And then there were the white people in Atlanta, but also the poor white people in Atlanta. So you have all of these different factions intersecting in this story and not dealing well with each other, may I say. And the thing just blew up. And then I think the reason that we still don't have the truth about what happened back then is because all of those different factions were just fighting with each other and distrusting each other and blocking each other and like treating it like a game of chess or something, instead of just really getting at the truth and figuring out what the truth was, not necessarily trying to defend their territory, which is what was happening. So anyway, very interesting. But what I was going to say was, because of that, a detective was called in to kind of investigate this crime and see if they could get more information about who killed the girl in this story. And I had not heard of this detective before. He was William J. Burns, and he had a detective agency, which it ended up becoming a security agency, which existed up until like the 1990s, I think. And he was apparently quite a figure in his day. Well known as a detective, kind of like a celebrity in a way. He was friends with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle referred to him as the American Sherlock Holmes because he was such a good detective, and he had some similarities to the personality of Sherlock Holmes and his style of investigation. He was called in to investigate this, but his office, they did work on it briefly, but then they were like, okay, you people in Atlanta, you need to sort yourselves out. We are not touching this with a 10-foot pole because we are not getting wrapped up in your politics. Bye-bye. See ya. Out. So they dropped that case like a hot potato, and unfortunately, we're not able to contribute to it. So anyway, I found that interesting. And apparently that detective, William Burns, he also wrote some detective novels, I think together with someone else, helped him write them, which I'm sort of, I mean, I don't think they were any great literature. I think they were popular in the day, but, I don't think all of them are available to read today, but I am curious to try them because sounds interesting. And finally, I am reading Beren and Luthien together with the Protagonist Pub's book club. Several of us are reading through this. I have not gotten very far. I am just about to start the actual story. So far, I've been reading the preface and all of the material that Christopher Tolkien, the son of J.R.R. Tolkien, has put in there to kind of set up the story so you have all the information necessary to know what's going on in the story of Beren and Luthien. But I'm looking forward to getting started reading that. One thing of interest so far is that apparently Tolkien was much inspired by a story in the Kalevala, which, if you remember from my February TBR video, was the book of Finnish mythology, and which was is on my possible TBR for February as being a Finnish classic because of my heritage. So he was apparently very much inspired by a particular story in the Kalevala, and kind of all of the whole world that he built for Lord of the Rings, etc., was kind of built from that story, is my understanding based on the comment that I read. from him. So that's interesting. I will say that I was completely lost in the preface of this book, and I was like, what? In the preface. What are we talking about? What? Who? What? When? What? Huh? That was pretty much my own reaction as I was reading the preface. And I was gratified to find out that I was not the only one who was struggling to understand. I'm hopeful that the actual story itself I will be able to follow. And I have gotten to page 40 and it is now about to start. So I'm looking forward to reading the actual story there. And yeah, so that's what I have got going on this week and into next week. Let me know if you've read any of these books and if you have thoughts about anything that I mentioned here, about the books I've read and am reading. And let me know what you have been reading this week that you have enjoyed. And I look forward to talking to you next time. Bye.